I took a newly purchased small pothos all the way from a very small plant to a large full plant in just over 2 years. And I'm going to show you the details of how I did that with pruning and propagation as well as repotting. It's been growing for a while. It's doing fairly well. It's healthy, but it's a little bit scrawny feeling. You can see there's only a few vines. It doesn't feel very full. So what I'm going to do is trim off several of the vines, not really short, but just trim off the ends, especially the really long ones. I'm going to root them in water and then transplant this. This is getting much too large. The plant's getting much too large for the pot, and it needs a bigger pot regardless. So when I transplant it, I'll take those rooted cuttings, put them in that new pot. It will be a little bit shorter than it was, but it will be much fuller, and eventually it'll grow out to the same length again, but be a bigger, fuller, healthier looking plant. When you do take cuttings from a pothos, what you want is you want to cut between two nodes. So the node is right here, you have a leaf coming out and you have small little root buds coming out. I'm actually going to take off the first couple leaves. So then these will just become rooted sections that eventually will go into the soil. But I like to have two nodes for rooting. I feel like I could get a lot more roots, get twice as many roots, and the plant starts much healthier. Remember to keep track of which side you're going to root. You want to root the site that was originally closer to the roots on the original plant. These pothos cuttings have been in water a lot longer than they really need to. It's definitely time to repot the pothos that's in the office and add these. There's just packed down here with roots. It's been many months since I originally took cuttings off of here, since I originally pruned this, and it's already grown out many feet. So it's time to take a few more cuttings and also to add back in the original cuttings that I took. So leaving these cuttings to root in water for so long may make it a little bit harder for them to transition into soil. And that's just because they get used to the water. So one way to get around that is to make sure to water regularly after you put your rooted cuttings into soil. You don't want it soggy, you don't want to get root rot, but if you water regularly and keep the soil damp for a while, it'll make that transition easier. So these cuttings I'm going to propagate a little bit differently. I'm just going to trim off a few of the leaves at the lowest few nodes and put them directly in soil. They should root just fine even without water propagation. So I'm also going to pull out any of the rotted roots. There's plenty of good healthy roots in here, but some of them are a bit squishy because I left it in water so long and I want to get rid of that. Got lots of roots growing out the bottom, so it's definitely time to repot this even without the extra cuttings. I'm going to loosen up the root ball just a little bit. So this was originally a 6-inch pot. If I were just repotting it, I would only go an inch or two bigger. But with all of these extra cuttings, I'm going to have to go pretty significantly bigger to fit it all in. So for my new pot, I'm going to use a mixture of potting soil, sand, and also some perlite to make sure that I have a fairly well draining soil, but something that won't dry out too fast because the pothos does like its moisture. It doesn't like to be soggy, but it likes its moisture. So it doesn't look amazing right now. It looks a little bit scrawny and beat up, but give it a few days to recover from the stress and a few months to grow out. I think it's going to look a lot better, a lot more full. There's already a good bit of new growth on this pothos. It's filling out some, still has a long ways to go before it looks great in this new pot, but it's already a lot more full, and I think it's going to look a lot better than it did previously, sort of long and stringy like it used to be. This pothos has really filled out since I trimmed it and put those cuttings back in the same pot, repotted the plant, and have also been giving it a bit more water and occasional fertilizer. I also took some of the cuttings over the 2 years and made a completely separate medium-sized pothos for my own house. And this is another one I grew from cuttings from that same original plant. And this is an ongoing process. I have some extra long segments of my big pothos that I may trim to propagate, and I also have some current cuttings that are rooting in water at the moment, and I'll use all these cuttings to either fill in places on my current pothos that are somewhat sparse, or potentially to make a new potting, a new pothos plant.